I'm Austinlugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about The Apartment.
So, can you give a short plot synopsis of what The Apartment is?
The Apartment is about a guy who works at an insurance agency in New York City, and he uses his small, crappy apartment. Well, he lets other people use his crappy apartment so they can have basically so they can have sex with their mistresses. And things do not go well for anyone. 1960, directed by and written by Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond. 1960. This is the second Billy Wilder movie I've seen. I saw Some Like It Hot like not too long ago for the first time. I liked it. It was like a kind of like a nice, fun, silly movie.
Hmm.
Of course, Jack Lemmon is in that movie. I'm a Jack Lemmon fan. I think he's very good. He was good in Some Like It Hot, and he's also very good in this movie. I like Some Like It Hot. It's a pretty fun movie. But yeah, unfortunately, those are the only ones I've watched.
So, you haven't seen Sunset Boulevard?
No, no. Look. The thing about these older movies, and we'll talk about older movies, is that like these older movies, like I love horror movies and action movies and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But like these older movies, I have to be in the right mood for them. Like I feel like they need a lot of patience.
Hmm.
Uh, so if I feel like I don't have the patience to watch a movie like that, I don't watch it. You know what I mean? So like Apartment requires a lot of patience. You
Yeah.
know, I just happen to be in the right mood for it. It's a lot of talking, a lot of dialogue. Not necessarily like an incredibly visual movie, but there's a lot of talking in it.
Hmm.
And I'm assuming that's how Billy Wilder's movies are, and other old movies of course as well. They're very talky, I guess you could say, which is fine. It depends. But yeah, if I'm that's why I just haven't seen. That's another reason why I just haven't seen a lot of these older movies, just because like I need to know I'm gonna be able to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I'll say the pacing, especially of Billy Wilder, I think his pacing in particular, which is it's interesting because he became a big filmmaker in the 60s. I mean, of course, Some Like It Hot and Sunset Boulevard came out in the 50s, I believe. Um,
I think Double Indemnity came out in the 40s, which I know people love as well.
yes, yeah, but like Billy
Really,
Wilder kind of became like the big uh, director in the 60s, which is interesting because his style of directing is a lot more of, say, the 30s or 40s, say, of like your Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn movies, your talkies, if you will. He's much more, especially because he's a writer first and a director second. I
I
would
know.
say he's much more interested in dialogue and story than he is in visuals. So he's kind of like, I suppose if you have like a say a Orson Welles or a Michelangelo Antonioni on one end of the spectrum, he's sort of on the other end. He's, like Jean-Luc Godard really is interested in story. He's not really interested in, dialogue. He's interested in the visuals and how to tell a story visually, where I would say Billy Wilder is sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where there are certainly some spectacular visuals, but visuals always come second to the
Yeah,
sort of more the story itself.
yeah. He's more interested in using like I guess the visual element of filmmaking to tell the story, and it's basically comes second before the writing, which is very good. And the thing about old movies too, like this, once again, when I say old movies, I say like movies made 1960 or earlier. Uh, the thing about movies like that is that usually I like that their main concern is telling a good story, which I like. And that's definitely what The Apartment is. It's definitely the biggest concern is telling the story. There's really nothing in the way in terms of like visuals or unusual qualities to it. But yeah, it's cool.
So we open up on like this aerial shot of New York City. It looks like it's basically just shot from like a plane or something.
Yeah,
And Jack Lemmon is giving this voiceover basically of, here's how many people live in New York City. Here's how many people work at this insurance agency I work at. And then we kind of close in on this wonderful, one of my favorite shots in The Apartment, and really one of my favorite shots in cinema, which is him sitting at this desk of like hundreds of people, and there's these beautiful leading lines, and there's like these
yeah,
bright lights hanging over it, and apparent supposedly to get it to look like there are more people in there than there actually are.
Oh,
Like
these maybe mirrors.
they use mirrors and they also use miniatures.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I did not
Yeah.
know that at all. I know that they do that. Yeah, there are some shots in Alien they do that where they're walking down a big long corridor and they put a mirror in the back, and if you look close enough, you can see the reflection of like Harry Dean Stanton. It's like I didn't notice that though. I didn't notice that they use tricks for that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's a really impressive use of both extras and also it reminds me a lot of in Citizen Kane, there's the scene where he is standing at the podium and it looks like there's like a big crowd of people. But what they actually used to do that is they got like this piece of paper and they just poked a bunch of holes in it and they just put like a flashlight under it, which is just
That reminds me, like, have you seen that new Zack Snyder movie, Army of the Dead?
not yet. No.
It sucked. It was really bad. And I watched it's a zombie movie, so there are like a lot of zombies everywhere.
Hmm.
And I watched the behind the scenes. For some reason, I watched the behind the scenes feature after I've watched the actual movie. I was like, okay, whatever. It played automatically on Netflix, and I was watching it, and they talked like forever about like using CGI to make like crowds of like zombies and crowds of people. You know what I mean? Like using a combination of like CGI and like actual extras. And they went into this thing where like, yeah, we like in order to make a big crowd of zombies, we scan actual people walking like using like a scanner. We CGI them in and and it's like all this shit. It's like, yeah, I guess it's impressive, but like if you watch the movie, the effect isn't very convincing or very interesting. It's very soulless.
Yeah.
Good work. Obviously, like tons of great work went into that. You know what I mean? Like painstaking stuff I would never imagine I could do, but it's just like the effect in the film is just don't do a good job. So, but the movie also has worse problems. So, also the fact that it's about 2.5 hours long is also a problem. But I digress.
So our protagonist, played by Jack Lemmon, who again just incredible, worked with he's in almost all of Billy Wilder's films. So it's interesting if you watch Billy Wilder films back to back, you see a ton of Jack Lemmon, who's incredible.
Yeah.
And he
Great.
plays CC Baxter, who is this kind of just one of 30 some thousand people working at this office. He's kind of a nobody and he's working late at the office. Everyone else sorry left. They kind of have like this bell that rings for each floor to like leave, and they all just like leave it for like the whole office to leave.
Yeah.
And he stays, and so he's like working late, and the voiceover is like, I don't actually work late, like I don't care about working late. I just can't go home. And then we cut to him walking home in like a dark, rainy night, and then that's the first time we cut to the apartment, right?
Yep. I love how it begins, by the way. It could like the movie would have been like so slow going if they decided to like do like an origin story. Instead, like you're in the middle of it happening and you get it right away. Like you totally get it. Like right away, you don't need like a long sequence of scenes to tell you like how this happened. It's just right away, like this is a reality, this is happening. I love that. You know what I mean? Because it would have just been so slow going. Like he kind of explains the origin of it later, but he
Mm-hmm.
explains it very briefly, and it's like, okay, now we know how it came about. But it doesn't like if watching that on film would have been just so pointless. It's so much more fun and interesting that we start right in the middle of it. That's so good. And
Yeah.
yeah, he goes to his apartment, and they're supposed to leave at like 8 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an hour, you know what I mean? They're late to leave, and
Yeah.
it's his coworkers with some women. And the way that they talk to each other too, right away, that like, oh, this isn't his wife, it's like his girlfriend,
Uh-huh.
because they're talking about like, you know, uh, they're getting dressed, and he's like, we got to get out of here, da, 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 you know, and he's like, and and Jack Lemmon's waiting around outside. Baxter is, and they like, I think they get out of the apartment, and he's like, oh, why all you dames live in? That's the other thing about old movies is like just like the this movie made me laugh a lot, intentionally and unintentionally, just because like some of the dialogue is just like, so that oldie dialogue is kind of fun to laugh at, like calling women dames and stuff like that. It's just like, it makes me laugh. It's just so
Yeah.
silly. It's like, why all you dames live in the forest or something like that. Like, okay. Yeah, and he finally Baxter, after waiting around, can go into the apartment.
And there's this wonderful line that just makes me laugh every time, which when the man is taking his mistress out of the apartment, she
Yeah, of
asks, she asks, "Do you take all your dames here?" And he says, "Of course not. I'm a married man."
course not. I'm a happily married man. Yeah. Yeah, really funny movie. I thought this movie was funnier than Some Like It Hot. I think Some Like It Hot is funny,
Hmm.
like a slapsticky Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton kind of way.
Yeah,
Apartment is just like more like Jack Lemmon is kind of like a slapsticky guy in a little bit in the movie,
mm,
but for the most part, it's the dialogue and it's very good.
yeah. And
But the situations too, like the situations that people are in, like those are funny too.
yeah, yeah. And I think you're kind of talking about how they, kind of laughing at the old language they use, using like dames and just kind of the what would today be considered archaic language. It feels a bit, and I think this is true of a lot of Billy Wilder's work, is it feels much more like work from the 40s, like a Howard Hawks or a George Cukor, than it does from films for the 60s. Because like if you listen to the dialogue of, again, going back to like Breathless or Leno, or a lot of films of the 60s, it doesn't have the same kind of dialogue. So I think part of it is just that he's kind of referencing back to this. He has a certain nostalgia for this certain time of filmmaking, just like so many filmmakers often move back to like an earlier time, or kind of you know have a lot of homages. I think in this sense, his writing, even though it's the 60s and it looks right, the film looks very 60s. You got like the hats and just the way people dress and kind of the futuristic weird thing going on, just like the way the world is kind of built. But at the same time, the
Yep.
language feels much older than the 60s. So CC Baxter goes back up to his apartment, and as he's walking up, that's where for the first time, we meet Dr. Dreyfus, right?
Yeah, his neighbor Dr. Dreyfus, and yeah, they have a funny conversation about like, oh, you're always partying in there. You're always like drinking, and we can hear you. And he's like, oh yeah, yeah, sorry, just kind of.
And everyone thinks, which is, I think, one of the reasons Jack Lemmon is a perfect choice, just incredible casting, even though Billy Wilder would have picked him anyways, is because Jack Lemmon is like one of the most sort of straight cut kind of people. Like he's just very clean.
Yeah, he kind of is. Yeah,
And thinking of him as like this, like, you know, sex monger partier is
yeah, it's funny too.
it's a little ridiculous. And so he gets the key from under the mat, which is where we kind of realize that that's kind of like how the system works. Is whenever someone and their mistress leaves the apartment, they leave it under the mat. And he goes back into the apartment and he's cleaning up, and there's just junk everywhere.
Yeah, he has to clean up their stupid mess. But yeah, and later though, I think he goes to the office the next day,
Hmm.
and we kind of also then discover like why he does it. It's because he wants to get ahead in his job, in his career at the insurance company. Um, and then you have that. I think he goes into the apartment the next day, and I think that's when he meets Fran Kublik. I believe gets on the elevator the next morning.
Oh, when he's going up to to
Yeah,
his office. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He meets Fran Kublik, played by Shirley MacLaine.
Hmm.
It's kind of like a movie about the two of them. You know, more or less. It's not really about primarily about Baxter. Uh, so yeah, you're introduced to the fact that she's an elevator attendant. It's such a weird job. I know people still do it, but like you just press the button. I mean, you can just.
It's pretty weird.
I guess like maybe elevators were so new back in the day that they were like, dude, people have no idea what they're gonna do when they see it. Like what, you know what I mean? Like we need to have these people to press the button. But yeah, she has a job and she's good. And she's sexually assaulted to after they have a little conversation. After not by Jack Lemmon. Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine have a fun little conversation in the elevator, and then she's sexually assaulted by the guy who was at the apartment the night before. So right away, every man in the movie is horrible except maybe for Jack Lemmon. He has some downfalls, but he's fine. And his doctor neighbor. Everybody, all the other men in the movie are horrible monsters. Uh, and yeah, like I said, uh, like I said, it's like, it's discovered that, he's kind of getting ahead because all the people using his apartment are basically higher ups. And there's this one very funny scene where he's at his desk and he has to reschedule everyone and he's going through his calendars and he's taking like several, which is a very long scene, and they do a good job kind of mixing it up.
Mhm.
Where he's kind of, yeah, having to, can you hold for a second? Can you do Wednesday? He's just like very, very funny, very good, ridiculous scene.
Mhm.
Like he's at his job and he's like basically scheduling out his like apartment so these dirty guys can have like sex with their mistresses.
Yeah, I think something that I'm always impressed when I watch this film is that there aren't really a whole lot of locations. I mean, there's the apartment, there's outside the apartment, there's a restaurant that they go to, there's like an office, and then there's like the big office. And that's about it. There's only like 5 or 6 locations. And these scenes often go very long. And Billy Wilder is known to hold on to scenes for a long time. And I can understand why you might want to have to be in a certain mood to watch these kinds of films. Because the thing with like once you get into like the 70s and 80s, especially with horror films, is they cut really fast. That's kind of when right the modern sort of cutting, coming from like Kurosawa's Seven Samurai and films like that, where
Yeah,
cutting just kind of
watch
jumps
that.
ahead.
I
Yeah.
watched Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider recently, and
Oh,
that
really?
the editing in that movie is crazy.
Yeah.
Especially when people watched it, they were like, "Whoa, this is crazy!" And I think that was only like what 9, 8, 7 years after The Apartment, and
Hmm.
it's a crazy movie where it has this like weird editing and drugs and yeah,
Yeah. And so I get why watching an older film takes a lot of patience, even if it is like a comedy, because it's just pacing was different. You watch a comedy from like the 20s or 30s or 40s and 50s, and even Billy Wilder's in the 60s, although this kind of where it's changing, they hold onto a shot for a really long time. They're just really willing. And I think part of the reason you don't see that today is because there's so much fear of boring a viewer, or like a viewer just like tuning out, because there's so many easy distractions. And I think
yeah,
today it's really risky to, it's so easy to just go, okay, we're gonna get our master, and then we're gonna go shot, reverse shot, and then we're gonna get our over the shoulders, and then we'll just like cut every 5 seconds, and it's fine, and it's enjoyable. So that's why I would say watching a bad movie from like 2020, I think, is a lot more tolerable than watching a bad movie from like the 1940s, just because it doesn't feel as long. Because a bad movie from like the 40s or 50s, which there's still plenty of, it just drags on forever and it feels so slow. But when it's done well, it's impressive. And I think that's kind of something that Billy Wilder does well, is he can hold on a scene for a long time. There'll be shots that just hold, and he'll just sit there, and he's fine with that. And I think that's something I miss a bit, I guess, in cinema.
yeah. The apartment's good because yeah, it does all those things where scenes will go on for a while, but because the writing and the characters are good, it's totally fine. Like I completely, didn't feel bored at all. You know what I mean? If the writing was bad, then yeah, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed uh, like how long some of the scenes go. But because
Mhm.
everything else works. Like some of the scenes could have gone on for another 5 minutes, and I would have been fine with that. So it's just really that's how it all comes down to. And yeah, it's very good. Mhm.
So we forgot to mention that while he's rescheduling all these people, he is sick because he couldn't get into his apartment.
That's true because I had to sit in the rain. Yeah.
So he had to sit in the rain all night, and he didn't get into his apartment until super late. So he's sick, and he's got like all these tissues, and he gets a call from the 27th floor, and it's his boss,
Sheldrake.
Sheldrick. And so he says, "Come up to my office." And so CC Baxter is super excited. He's like, "Oh, I'm finally gonna get that raise. I'm finally gonna move ahead in the world." And he goes to the elevator. He gets on the elevator with the same woman from before, and he's like blowing snot everywhere. He's got like tons of tissues, and he's all excited. He's like, "Oh, look at me. I'm gonna be the big man on campus." And he goes up to the 27th floor. He gets into the office, and he's still pretty pumped. He's pretty excited, and he sits down in the chair, and Sheldrick basically goes on this rant tangent sort of thing, talking about the last person who became super popular, ran like a
Bookie.
bookie, was like a bookie.
Yeah, he was a bookie. Yeah.
And so
What do
immediately
you do?
CC Baxter goes from like very excited to very terrified. And it kind of feels like, is he going to lose his job here? Is this, what's going to happen here? And we come to learn that, of course, just like all the other men, Sheldrick has his lovers, and he
But
wants.
that progression of that conversation, very good, very 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 good, super funny. Because yeah, at first you're like, oh no, Jack Lemon's gonna get scolded and fired, da, 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 da. But then it's like, yeah, it's revealed like, oh, now Sheldrake wants the apartment.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, that's a good scene. That's a good scene.
And CC Baxter, I don't know if it's like just genuine naivete, but like takes a long time to kind of realize what's going on. He's just like totally confused that
Yeah,
this man, he just doesn't get it.
he was just talking about how the other guys are like morally apprehensive, because he
Yeah.
uses his apartment, but now he wants it, and he's like, what?
And
So,
so, in exchange for the key and the promise of moving up in the world, CC Baxter is given 2 tickets to the Music Man.
yep.
So he takes the tickets. He feels like, he feels a little stretched thin because he has to like move everything around because he never seems to be in his own apartment because he's constantly lending it out to
Yep.
men having affairs. And that night, or that evening, he waits for the elevator girl, which her name is
Fran.
Fran. And he waits for Fran, and Fran comes out of the elevator, and he invites her to go to the Music Man. And she says, "Oh, I haven't seen it before. I would love to, but I have to do this other thing with this other guy." And he kind of
Yeah.
asks
As
about
soon as she said that, I was like, huh, okay.
it.
It's kind of you do see it coming, but
Mhm.
that's okay. It's fine. You know what I mean? It's more like, even though you see it coming, right when Fran says like, yeah, I'm seeing someone else tonight, you're like, okay, yeah, you kind of realize like, okay, I think I know what's gonna happen. But even then, like, you still, you know, Baxter doesn't know. So there's still that like tension or that edge to it, even if you do, even if the viewer does know, he doesn't know. So it's still good.
And so Fran says, "Well, I don't know if I can go to dinner, but maybe I can meet you at the Music Man, at the theater where the Music Man's playing." And so CC Baxter's super excited. So then we cut to Fran sitting at this like tiki bar, or
It's like a Chinese restaurant.
yeah, like a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah.
And of course, we learned that Fran is sitting across from Mr. Sheldrick.
Yes. Yeah, and they just have a conversation about like, Sheldrake says that, I don't want to break up. Please, I want to divorce. I'm going to divorce my wife. Um, and she's like, I don't know. Da, da, da. He's like, look, let's go to this apartment, and hang out. And then I think, as they're leaving, his secretary comes in.
Mhm,
She spots them. She just sees them, his secretary.
mhm.
Um, and they leave, and they go to his apartment, and Baxter is stood up. He's outside of the theater, and I think he just leaves. And then I think after that, it cuts to the Christmas party. I think the Christmas party is the next scene, because that's a scene where he sees Fran again, and he's like, "Hey, I'm not mad at you."
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember if he got promoted first or not.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think you're right. He does. I think he does get promoted first, because after finally,
Yeah.
you know, letting all these guys. Yes, because yeah, exactly. I know what you're talking about, because yeah, the scene where he gets his own office, he's
Mhm.
like an assistant manager. Whatever. Who cares? Like the four guys who's been helping out are like, hey, we want to use the apartment again. Say, you better be giving us the apartment. Just like, oh well, and, they all have guns. No, I'm kidding. They're doing the thing where they hold the gun at their head. Like, all right, say, gonna let us. I guess like, I guess it's better than using a hotel room, just because like, I think the point of the apartment is not to spend the night. It's to just like hang out for like a couple minutes, like a couple hours. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's just like extra scummy. It's like, yeah, it's just like, I guess like if you did that like at a hotel, it would be very expensive and kind of weird, and people
Yeah.
would see you. But I
Yeah.
guess the apartment is, at the point of it is that like no one's really there, and it's kind of far from everything. was like, why the fuck did they just go to hotel rooms? Because they don't want to spend the night. They want to just, you know.
Yeah, I think it's partly that, and then also partly, you don't want something like The Graduate where they keep going back to the same hotel and everyone recognizes.
That's true.
So so basically CZ Baxter's sort of grown a little bit of a backbone, and he's kind of like, he still gives his key to Mr. Sheldrick, but because he can give the key to Mr. Sheldrick, who's above all of them, he's able to kind of push the others out, which kind of pisses all of them off because they're like, oh, we're the reason that you're here, we're the reason that you
Yeah, they
are
get,
where you are.
yeah.
But he basically just pushes them out, and Mr. Sheldrick asks for his own key because he's tired of having to borrow CC Baxter's key. So he says, well, why don't you just make me your own key? Now that you have this new job, why don't you make me your own key? And he's like, oh, okay. And after that is the Christmas party.
Also, they set up the fact that he finds a mirror,
That's right.
broken mirror, and she's like, and then yeah, Mr. Sheldrick, he's like, yeah, bro, because she threw it at me. Ha, women think that you're gonna divorce the, you know what I mean? It's just like right away you get the feeling like, oh, Mr. Sheldrick is like kind of messing with her, and like she like threw something at him. And then yeah, the Christmas party where it's crazy party, the craziest party I've ever seen. Drinking, there's like people are drunk, and yeah, and then Sheldrick's secretary uh, is drunk, and she goes up to Fran. During this though, like Fran and Baxter, they're like kind of hanging out, they're having a couple drinks and stuff, and then yeah, the secretary goes up to Fran, and she's drunk.
And the secretary basically explains to Fran that Fran is just one in a long line of girls, which of course she is, that have seen Mr. Sheldrick. The secretary was once Mr. Sheldrick's lover. This other person was, and that he always basically has the same ploy. He says, "Oh, I'm gonna divorce my wife, and I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that,"
Yeah,
and never really happens. And Fran, who for some reason is just so in love with Mr. Sheldrick, like just
he likes him a lot. He sucks.
he's the worst. He's a terrible person, but she loves him. And so at this point, her heart is a bit broken. She kind of feels betrayed, I suppose.
Yeah, she's upset. And I think, yeah, and Baxter's like, he doesn't realize what's going on. And, he's like, hey, come into my office. And they're like kind of talking and stuff. And she gives him a mirror, and it's the same mirror that Mr. Sheldrick had. And that's when he realizes, oh, the woman that Sheldrick has been seeing is Fran. And that also upsets him.
Yeah, at this point, they're all sort of in an equal state of upset. I mean, Mr. Sheldrick at this point is still a bit naive to the situation, but
yeah.
At this point, Franz doesn't know that they're going to CC Baxter's apartment. She just assumes it's just some apartment. She doesn't know who's.
Yeah, she doesn't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So CC Baxter's really the only one that kind of knows everything that's going on. Well, some of the things that are going on. He knows that Fran and Sheldrick are a thing.
So after the Christmas party, Sheldrick and Fran have their meeting, and then Baxter goes to the bar. Remember?
Right, because he's all upset because he thought Fran was the girl for him, and now he's realized that Fran is with Mr. Sheldrick, which is he feels even more scummy about because it's he's kind of profited off this whole thing, and he feels weird and gross about it because to him before, I suppose, he knew that these men were he obviously knew these men were having extramarital affairs, but he was like, it's not really my business. I don't
yeah.
He felt morally ambiguous, I guess, about the situation. Like it's just not his thing, and this is how you get ahead in the world is basically his thought. It's not that he's like a super ambitious person either. It's not like he's like this darkly ambitious figure. He just
that's kind of the weird thing about it too, is that like he doesn't come across as, I guess he's pretty ambitious, like there's a reason why he wants the job. But it's funny too because even when he gets like this new job, he doesn't really get any like very much respect from people, right? Like no one actually like all the people who like he's been helping like don't care about him anymore when he doesn't give them what they want. So who cares if you have the new job, you know what I mean? Like no one really like respects him all that much, so he doesn't get respect. I guess he gets a little bit of pay, but obviously that's not important to him. So it's like yeah, I guess like the question is like, why is he like doing this apartment thing? And I think it's just because like he can't say no. You know what I mean? Like he's a yes man too.
Yeah.
Part of it, I think he's like a yes man. He wants to please people. You know, he doesn't want to make anyone upset, or he wants to be everyone's friend and stuff like that. Even if it means kind of like helping these guys do like these really awful things and stuff, and also trash his place. So and yeah,
So CC Baxter goes to a bar where he meets this
married woman.
married married woman who's married to a jockey who is in prison in Havana for for doping his horse. And basically at this point everyone else has left the bar and it's just CC Baxter and this drunk woman, drunkenly dancing across this bar. And while this is happening, back at the apartment, Mr. Sheldrick is having this huge fight with Fran. And,
Yeah,
and Mr. Sheldrick just like he's so just like calm and like collected. He's just like, oh, you're just overreacting. Like this isn't a big deal. And, and I mean, I guess like yeah, she's upset, but again, this is kind of her life. And he's just like, just screwing around with it. And he doesn't really, you can see clearly that like he's this very like smooth talking, like very, suave kind of guy, but he doesn't care about her. He doesn't care about
no,
anyone.
he does not. Yeah, no, that's clear because yeah, they exchange presents and she gets him like a record, and then he's just like, hey, here's $100, which is like, yeah, that's just the ultimate like, you know, whatever. Like,
It's yeah,
you can have whatever I have in my wallet. It's like very, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, the implication is that Fran probably felt like, like a whore or a
yeah.
prostitute. Like,
And
here's $100.
yeah. Yeah, and I love that scene because right as he hands her the $100, she like starts like taking her gloves off, and she takes her jacket off, and like you can see to her that it's, she very much feels like a sort of prostitute or a sex worker, someone who's just kind of in it for the which clearly Fran is not in it for the societal benefits or the economic benefits of it.
No.
And so she's so pissed off, and he's like, well, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta get home, I have to get on the train. And he's like, are you coming with me? And she's like, I'm just
It's Christmas Eve, by the way. By the way, what's his excuse for being gone on Christmas Eve night? You know,
he works late, he's at a Christmas party.
it's Christmas Eve though. Like, I don't know. I guess at a Christmas party. But yeah, it's just like if you have kids, like I figured you'd want to like, I don't know. I feel like that would be unusual, but whatever. I guess it's not.
Look, he's a terrible person, so
So
I imagine his wife is a bit suspects some things, as
probably, yeah.
so Mr. Sheldrick leaves, she goes into the bathroom, and we see her holding like a bottle of sleeping pills.
Yeah.
And then we cut back to CC Baxter and this woman, and they decide to go back to the apartment. And they're like drunkenly wobbling their way over to her. I forgot to mention, I wanted to mention this earlier, but there's a point in the movie where they describe one of the female lovers as Marilyn Monroe esque.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, he's like, I got the spine, Yeah.
And part of that's actually sort of an inside joke for Billy Wilder because when he was actually working on, I can't remember if it was Some Like It Hot or another. He worked on two films with Marilyn Monroe,
Okay.
and is Some Like It Hot the one where there's like the wind from the vent and then it like blows up her like skirt? Do you know
I
what I'm
don't
talking
remember.
about?
I
Okay.
don't remember if that scene was in that movie, but I know what you're talking about.
So apparently that scene took over 100 takes
What?
because Marilyn Monroe could not. She had like one line and she could not remember it for the life of her. And Billy Wilder went absolutely insane. And after that film, he refused to ever work with her again, and he hated because he worked on a few films with her. He worked on 7 Year Itch, Some Like It Hot, and there might be one other one.
She's pretty good in some. I mean, like she's like fine in Some Like It Hot. She kind of she's whatever.
Yeah, I think if you see her last performance, it's a John Ford movie. It came out in like 1960. It was only a couple of it came out just like a couple, or it was shot a couple of months before she ended up committing suicide. It's an incredible performance if you ever have the chance. It's one of John Ford's last films too, which is really interesting. And it's about Marilyn Monroe. It's about basically it's about Marilyn Monroe because it's about this woman who's like in her mid-30s who's starting to age, and she's absolutely terrified of it. It's a really interesting film, and Marilyn Monroe gives an incredible performance. But part of the reason that the Marilyn Monroe joke is in this film is because by this point, Billy Wilder just hates like he hates her. He hates her so much. He hates everything about her, and he was just trying to piss her off. Which, I mean, yeah, he paints like this Marilyn Monroe character as just like this really stupid, dumb, right, just beautiful woman.
Yeah.
But that's neither here or there. So CC Baxter is wobbling back to the apartment with this drunken woman who's I love this woman. Uh, this like type of character who's just like this. I don't even know how to describe this type of character, but it's like a very
The woman that he picked up.
yeah.
Oh yeah, she has like the accent, like yeah. She has like a very high pitched like New York accent that like you always hear in old movies and stuff. It's like very like yeah, she's funny. She's kind of a comic relief character because I think like yeah, he gets to the apartment with her and she's like and she like can't stop talking and she's like and then he realizes oh my god like she's unresponsive. Fran is unresponsive. What am I gonna do? So he's like about to call the ambulance, but then he's like wait, my doctor neighbor.
Yeah, and I love that shot too because it reminds me a lot of. Have you seen Imp for Murder? It's a 1940s or maybe 30s Alfred Hitchcock film, and there's a shot that's almost exactly the same where it's a long shot held with the uh, phone in the forefront and the protagonist in the background kind of walking towards it, and it's just this beautiful long take, and it's just frame. I think something we haven't talked about yet is when they're in the apartment, the framing
Yeah.
is really wonderful. Like I would say like outside the apartment it's fine. Like I don't think there's a lot like the restaurant's really not that interesting. There's some cool shots in the office, but other than like him sitting at his original desk, like him and at the like when he once he gets his office or like once he gets another office, it's not as interesting. But I would say the framing of the apartment is almost always just so beautifully done. And this is one of my favorite shots where he goes to call an ambulance and then he realizes that if he calls an ambulance, then there'll be a report. And then it's amazing what lengths he'll go to
Make him happy. Why? You know?
yeah, because it's not even like because it doesn't really feel like it's like a purely ambitious thing. Like it doesn't feel like CC Baxter is like an evil person who's just like, oh, I'll do whatever I can to get ahead. He just seems like to genuinely care for this awful man.
Yeah, it's really weird. But I don't know. For some reason it's believable. I don't know why, but it is.
Yeah, yeah, it just it works for some reason. So he kicks the woman whose husband is Savannah, and he kicks her out of the house or apartment. He goes to get Dr. Dreyfus, and of course, Dr. Dreyfus at this point still thinks that uh, CC Baxter is this big,
Yeah.
bachelor partier.
Yeah, they basically like fool each other into believing that um like Baxter's the one who kind of
Yeah.
was it was his fault that she tried to commit suicide.
Mhm.
And Dreyfus is just like, you got to get your life together. And I think he says like you have to be a mensch, which is in German a human being.
Mhm.
Um, which is interesting. That of course plays in later into the movie. There's a lot of stuff dialogue in this movie that kind of is said, but it plays in later in the movie.
Yeah.
Um, and even though like Dreyfus is giving Baxter advice on something that isn't true, the advice still applies to his life anyway.
Yeah.
And then yeah, they pretty much yeah, Fran is like fine now, sort of. But she has to spend like the next 2 days recovering from her suicide attempt in the apartment now, and to hang
Mhm.
out and hangs out with Baxter.
Mhm. And so those next 2 days are sort of I guess what in a modern rom-com would be like your sort of your love montage. It's not really a montage though. It's just a couple of scenes where even after all of this still kind of in love with him, or not with Baxter, but with Mr. Scheidrich.
Yeah,
And for some reason, CC Baxter is like, well, he's maybe there's this moment where she asks to brush her teeth, and he goes into the bathroom and he's like takes out like the razor head and he like takes out like the pills. He's like terrified of her committing suicide again because Dr. Dreyfus has told her that you do it once and it's bound to happen again. Which is I always forget like how strange the tone of the second half of the film is because like because up
yeah,
to that point like the film's pretty lighthearted and fun
yeah.
but then there's a suicide attempt,
Yeah.
and it's still, I mean, it's still like a pretty comedic film from this point on, but the tone is a bit strange because there's this underlying thought that she might try to commit suicide, and he's absolutely terrified of that, and so he's like, putting stuff away and like trying to hide things, and he's basically doing everything he can to take care of her, and he goes back to Dr. Dreyfus' apartment because he wants to make her breakfast, and Dr. Dreyfus's wife answers, and of course she hates CC Baxter. She hates him so much.
The funniest part of that whole, uh, that's the funniest part of the whole time when she's at the apartment recuperating is the doctor's wife like giving her food and being like, yeah, he sucks. He's no good.
Yeah, and similar to when Dr. Dreyfus gave him advice, Mrs. Dreyfus gives her advice, assuming it's about CC Baxter, right? But it actually applies to Mr. Sheldrick, and she kind of takes that advice uh, to heart. She's like, oh well, maybe this Mr. Sheldrick guy really isn't all he's we thought he was. And CC Baxter has an envelope, which he assumes is a suicide note because he has called Mr. Sheldrick on the phone, and he's like, on Christmas Day,
Yeah.
and he's playing with his kids, and he's on the phone, and his wife comes down, and he's like, who are you talking to? And he's like, oh, it just
Oh, somebody got hurt at work or something.
I don't know why they bother me.
Yeah, what the heck?
And so he's on the phone, and CC Baxter's like, hey, your mistress, she just tried to kill herself. Do you want to come over here? And he's like, no, I can't do that, it's Christmas. And he's like, okay, well, do you want to like talk to her on the phone? No, I can't do that.
To do that. Yeah. Yeah. He's like, okay.
He's like, I guess that's okay. And he goes back into the bedroom, and he's like, oh, Mr. Sheldrick said, lots of nice things, and he hopes you get better. And she, of course, doesn't buy it. And she's like, open the envelope, which at this point we assume is a suicide letter. And he's like, well, I don't know. And he's like, no, open the envelope. And he opens the envelope, and in the envelope is the $100 bill that she was given to earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they also have a game of gin rummy. They play gin rummy. And at one point too, during the while they're there, Baxter like confesses his own story about how he almost committed suicide as well, where he he lost this woman that he loved, and so he went to drive somewhere in his car, and he was going to shoot himself in the head, but he couldn't do it, and a cop pulled up, and he accidentally shoots himself in the knee, and he says that person now sends him a fruitcake every Christmas. He's like, yeah, I have the fruitcake right here because it's around Christmas time.
Right.
And yeah, they have a gin rummy. They play gin rummy, and Fran talks about how she's she just talks about how she suffered bad luck in terms of her love life and stuff like that, and she talks about like she does love Sheldrick, like you said, and then I think like the one of the managers tries to come to the apartment,
Yeah.
which also is a funny scene, kind of.
Because one of the managers tries to come, and he has like this thing of champagne. He's like, oh, I was scheduled in for 4 on Christmas Day for some reason, which like, how did he get away from his wife on Christmas Day at 4 in the afternoon? So the manager comes in with this big thing of champagne, and CC Baxter's like, you got to leave, you got to go, you can't be here. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I had an appointment. And they, again, all of the managers just feel like they own like the apartment, like they care nothing for CC Baxter. But then they see Fran in the bedroom, and of course they get the idea that
It's like, oh,
oh, I get, you don't have to tell me, buddy boy. And so the manager leaves with this newfound, and he's like, oh, I'll keep my lips locked. I'm not going to tell anybody about your big secret. And this is also the same person that sexually abused Fran in the elevator.
yeah.
So a real great guy, real all-around great guy.
Yeah, awesome guy. Really best character in the movie. Yeah, and he's just like, whatever, this sucks. And then I think it's like the next day, right? And both of them have not arrived to work. They're both still at the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, and the managers are talking. It's like, yeah, I saw Fran at his apartment. Like, oh wow, how about that? And then earlier, Fran is like, I need to talk to my sister and my brother-in-law. I live with them. They're going to be worried. So the brother-in-law after not hearing from Fran, goes to her job, talks to the managers, and then he's able to find out that, with the managers are hand reading because the guy appears violent. So he's like, yeah, he's here. She's here. And he's like, he goes there, um, and he's mad. The brother-in-law is, pissed off, just because like he's like, have you forgotten where you live, Fran? Like, you won't call us? Like, what's going on? He's like upset, uh, and I think even then the brother-in-law finds out that she tried to kill himself, and she tried to kill herself, and then the brother-in-law punches him, Baxter, in the face, and Frank kisses him, and then they leave, and that's the end of her visit at the apartment. He gets punched in the face. uh, and then I think after that is the scene where Mr. Sheldrick fires his secretary.
Yes. Which is just like, I get that Mr. Sheldrick.
Why would he do that?
Yeah, like, know the cards that you're playing, because he's dated the secretary, and the secretary knows about every woman who's come in, and Mr. Sheldrick just like immediately he fires her.
He fires her because the secretary had told Fran about his other affairs, which is like, yeah, I mean, but that's why you don't fire that person.
Exactly, like she knows about all these affairs, like she's playing all the cards, but
she's weird.
He fires her, and so she goes out into her like secretary office area, and she calls up Mrs. Sheldrick, and she's like, "Hey, do you want to get lunch? I have some educational information for you."
Yeah.
Which of course they go and get lunch, and this is when CC Baxter comes back to the office with the big sunglasses, because he's got the big shiner.
Punched, yeah.
And he goes up to the executive, or to Mr. Scheidrick's office, where Mr. Scheidrick shows him his new office, which is literally just like the room next to Mr. Scheidrick's.
Yeah. It's weird. Yeah,
And
he's been promoted again.
Wonder why. And he gives him this like new room, and CC Baxter's like, cool, awesome, just what I wanted, more stuff.
I wanted. Yeah. He's just like, yeah. So, yeah, and it's established too, of course, that they're getting a divorce, and that Sheldrick appears that he's going to easily now pursue his affair with Fran more. Yeah. So yeah, they're seeing each other again, and they're all depressed.
Yeah.
And then we're getting kind of like to the last part of the movie where it's fucking awesome. He's got his office, is super cool. And then I think it's like New Year's Eve. And Sheldrick is like, all right, good job. I'm gonna need your key though for your apartment to hang out with Fran.
Yeah.
Who's recovering, I guess you could say. She's obviously like kind of I guess being taken advantage of, definitely, even though he's divorcing his wife. I think even they have a conversation, like Baxter and Fran, they kind of have like a weird forlorn conversation about that, like, oh, they're getting divorced, cool, that's great for you. I think so.
Yeah. Is that the scene where they're in the lobby?
I think so.
Yeah. And like Fran comes out of the elevator, and he's like looking at this like board, because they're like putting up his name in the new office. So like CC Baxter, second, I don't know, assistant director, something, doesn't matter. And Fran comes out, and he has like the short conversation with her, and he's like, "Oh, I hear that he's getting divorced, and that you can pursue him." And she's like, "Yeah, I guess." And she's like, "Do you want to go? Do you want to go out? Do you want to go do something?" And he's like, "No. I have a date over there. I have to go. Yeah, I'm going with her." And so she walks away, and I love this moment because it's a oneer. And so they talk, and then she leaves, and he walks this long lobby, and it follows him down this lobby, and you see this woman standing there. You assume who's waiting for him, and the elevator opens, and like literally as he like walks up to her, she turns, a man comes, and the two of them walk off, and Baxter goes to like this newspaper stand, and it's just this like wonderful visual, just like right, because it's not only showing that he's not with someone, but it's right. It's a metaphor for Fran and Mr. Sheldrick and him, and I just love the visual of it. It's just very
Yeah.
well blocked scene.
Yeah.
So then they're back at the. So then CC Baxter's back in the office, and yeah, Mr. Sheldrick's like, "Hey, I yeah, I need your key," uh, and Mr. Baxter or CC Baxter's like, "What? I thought you had like you should have your own key." And he's like, "Oh, when I heard about what happened, the suicide attempt, he threw the key out the window of the subway, which is something."
Yeah.
and so he's like, "Oh, okay, I need your key." And CC Baxter's like, "No, you can't have my key. You can never come to the apartment again. You can never, and you can especially never take Fran to your apartment again."
Yeah.
And basically, Mr. Shardov points out, he goes, "Hey, look, the only reason you're here is because I get to use your apartment. That's the only reason. You're not like extra talented. You're not any good at what you do. It takes years for people to get in this position and 30 seconds to leave. So just give me your key." So CC Baxter's like, "Okay," gives him a key, and he walks into his office, which again is right next to Mr. Sheldrick's. And he's starting to put on his coat. And Mr. Sheldrick comes in. He's like, "Wait a minute, you gave me the wrong key."
Yeah.
CC Baxter's like, "No, I gave you the right key. I gave you the key to the executive
Washroom.
washroom." And so basically, CC Baxter's like, "You're not getting the apartment key. You don't get this. I'm taking control of my life. I'm giving up everything because love, or I don't know if it's love necessarily, or just like,
He said he's going to become a mensch.
yes, that's right. He says, "I'm going to become a mensch."
Yeah. And he quits and he goes to the apartment and he starts packing up his stuff because he's kind of he's done. Um, he's not going to deal with that crap anymore. And I think I will say too, the movie is a lot. The movie I think has a lot to say about like corporatism, which probably has only gotten worse over the past like
Yeah.
50, 60 years. You know what I mean? Kind of like just this idea that if you work really hard in like a corporation, you'll be able to be the assistant director. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, like it's really just all about doing like favors for people, right? It's not really about. It's not. I mean, sometimes it is, of course. We would like to think that it is, but I think sometimes it really is about doing favors for people,
Yeah.
which shows how I guess flawed it is and how like stupid and dumb it is. Corporations. They the people at the top aren't necessarily the most talented people. They're just the most. They're either people who are willing to hurt or other people, or they're people who are yes men who are willing to do what other people to do what they say. You know what I mean? So, and Jack Lemmon he's the yes man, but then of course he realizes no, uh, this isn't right. I'm not going to play this game anymore. It's not good. I quit. So it's very good. Progresses well. And then I think that night like Sheldrick and Fran like are at a party. It's New Year's Eve.
They're at a New Year's Eve party, and you can see that Fran's, not in a great place. Mr. Sheldrick's living his best life,
Yeah,
and he comes over there, and he's like, "Hey, we're gonna go to Atlantic City because I couldn't get a hotel room in New York."
yeah. She's like, okay.
He's like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, I was gonna use this guy's apartment, CC Baxter, but this rude, terrible person wouldn't let me use his apartment."
Yeah, he sucks. He quit. What an idiot.
What an idiot. And she has this like moment of recognition that CC Baxter has given up everything.
He stood up for himself and he
Yeah,
stood up for Fran,
which is
which
pretty cool.
really did.
Yeah. So she leaves the New Year's party and she goes to the apartment where she's walking up the stairs and she hears a gunshot,
Yeah.
or what we assume is a gunshot. So she freaks out. She runs to the apartment. She's slamming on the door, and CC Baxter opens the door and he has this bottle of champagne that's just overflowing. And it takes her a minute to figure out that he is not indeed trying to commit suicide, just opening a bottle of champagne.
Yeah. And that part's kind of cool just because like it's more like he probably is happier than he's ever been because he stood up to him. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh no, he lost his girl or whatever, and now he's sad. But that's okay though because he stood up for himself and for Fran. So he probably feels like that's why he probably opened the champagne is because he's feeling awesome. You know what I mean? Like So yeah, I feel like that's a good indication of his feeling because he's like, obviously he said he can't be with Fran probably at that moment, but it's kind of interesting because he stood up for himself not because he was sad but because he was brave, and now he's feeling good because that feels good to do.
Yeah.
It's good.
So she goes back into the apartment. They have like a little last conversation. He's like, I'm moving. I don't want to be here anymore. Maybe new town, new city, whatever. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to, kind of change things. And she asks to play a game of gin rummy. Obviously, a reference to the gin rummy game they played earlier in the film. And that's how the film ends, with the two of them playing gin rummy.
Yeah, I think like Fran, yeah, he says like, yeah, they both say like, yeah, like we're both, like we don't have jobs and we're both single. And then I think like he asks about Sheldrake, and she says like, "Oh, we'll send him a fruitcake."
Yeah.
And I think he says like, "I love you" or whatever, and she's like, "Oh, just whatever, shut up and deal," in a fun, way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like it ends on a very, very nice, very kind of sort of happy ending. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Where she doesn't really say like, "Oh, I love you," CC Baxter. She doesn't say anything like that. She's just more kind of like impressed with him, you know what I mean? So, and the time that they shared in the apartment, cemented at least like a friendship, like at least like some kind of, strong bond of something, so, and that's good enough for both of them. So, yeah, nice, nice, nice ending. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So out of 10, what would you rate this film, Andrew?
I think if I had to rate it, I think I would give it like an 8. It's quite good. I liked it more than Some Like It Hot.
Mhm.
I think the thing about Some Like It Hot is that like the apartment at least has like has that turning point when she tries to commit suicide that really adds to the movie.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, just great writing. I love Jack Lemmon, fantastic, very likable, very relatable guy. Um, when you see him like struggle or just do anything, he's just a very funny, nice person, very relatable. Um, you know, very good guy. And Shirley MacLaine was also very good too. Very nice, relatable. Um, you know, you want everyone to succeed, and just visually, looked fine. Black, nice black and white. It's uh, pretty good. But yeah, just the writing and the acting are really what it's all about. With a movie like this, that's really what it's all about. Just kind of the great story, like that just progresses very nicely, and everything makes sense for the most part. And it's just a very enjoyable, nice story where it starts in a very satisfying way and it ends in a very satisfying way. Just very expertly crafted. So yeah, I would give it an 8. It's good.
I think I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. I adore this movie so much. I adore Billy Wilder. He was always been one of my favorite directors. And originally when I watched it, I gave it an 8 out of 10. And typically when I rewatch a film, the score goes down more than it goes up. And there's just something about this film that I just find so magical and beautiful and wonderful. And we didn't even talk about the score at all, but I love the score and that kind of like, the kind of jazzy score. I mean, it's sort of heavy at times, it's kind of always there, but I love the score. Incredible performances. I love Jack Lemmon. I think Billy Wilder is one of the great writers of the 20th century. If I had any, the reason it's not a 10 out of 10 is I do think it steps a very fine line on the tone for the second half of the film, because when I watch the film for a second time and watch the beginning of the film, it's just so funny and like lighthearted, and I think it's fine that it transitions into a different film, and that's great, and I think it does a really good job. But I think that's a really hard tone to master, and I think at sometimes it's sort of on the line. So great film overall, but maybe not a 10 out of 10. All right, y'all. Thank you all for listening. I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
You can find me at Austinlugo12.
You can find me at 80harp24 on twitter.com.
And please be sure to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you listen or watch this.
Thank you so much for listening, guys.